Okay. Okay, ladies. Well, thank you so much for joining tonight for kind of like a meet and greet and for our lecture. And I just kind of wanted to gather. It's a short class and we don't get to really meet in person. And so I thought meeting together this way would be great to maybe answer some questions about the syllabus or speak directly to some of them. And then I'll throw in a mini lecture that will go along with your reading and that will help you with your discussion board posts for this week as well. So we'll just dive right in. If y'all want to pull up your syllabus and kind of follow along, I'm going to just briefly hit some highlights with that. So first of all, the course, the focus of Women in Ministry, it's going to be designed initially to study biblical passages that I would call challenging passages. They may be misunderstood or used as barriers to keep women from fully walking in their calling and fully being able to minister as God has called them to minister. We're also going to talk about the social implications of gender differences in ministry in terms of how women are able to minister, say maybe to other females or to males or to the church as a whole. And then, of course, we will talk just about what it means to be a woman who ministers. And that's really more my, I guess, the angle or the lens through which I view women in ministry. I view myself primarily as a minister who happens to be a woman, as opposed to a woman who is a minister, because I feel like God calls us individually, and then we walk in that regardless of our gender, regardless of our race, regardless of our socioeconomic status. So we'll talk about what it means for us as ministers who happen to be women in terms of how we develop our character and how we strengthen ourselves along the road for calling. And so I want to speak just briefly from the syllabus about what we will be talking about throughout the context of this semester. And one thing that I think that could be easiest to misinterpret would be our reading, the assigned readings. So I wanted to talk about that as well. So there is one book that is assigned for everyone to read. That's the Daniel Coren book, He Called Her. And it's very well done. It's a pretty easy read, but he does dive in to some of the challenging passages that we're going to be talking about, and just a lot of issues. So that is the required reading that everyone across the course will read. Then there's another component. There are 3 books that I have listed that are, I have them listed kind of like in the wellness component. So if you're looking in that required reading, it's right underneath there. And those books are, it says they're designed to provide insight that fosters wellness and longevity in ministry. Now, here's the key that you need to know. You will choose one of these books that you feel would be most beneficial to you personally, whether that's based on your previous experience or your personality traits, or maybe it's already something that you struggle with, or something along those lines. And so I chose 3 books that I felt would be really just based out of my personal experiences. I thought that might be impactful for you to work through introspectively. And so one of them is, there are actually 2 by Sharon Miller. One is entitled Nice. Okay, and so this is Why We Love to Be Like and How God Calls Us to More. And so it's kind of the whole, addresses the whole people-pleasing aspect of that a lot of us struggle with, particularly women in ministry. If you are not a people pleaser, if you are fine making decisions and letting the chips fall where they may, then this might not be the book for you. But that's an area of struggle for you, and that might be something to consider. The other book by Sharon Miller is The Cost of Control. And so this book, why we crave it, the anxiety it gives us, and the real power of God's promises. And so I think, if you may feel like you are someone who, you are a checklist girl, you like to have your life planned, and you like to know what the next step is, and you want to follow along those lines, that might be a good one for you. I have the unique challenge that I am both of these. And so I need people to like me, and I like to have my life planned out and be in control. So I have double anxiety. So there's that. Confession is good for the soul, right? So when you can identify that, you can work through it. I'm just giving y'all a head start. Like when I was your age, if I had these books to read, it would have helped me. And then I think probably just the one that could be relevant to anybody, particularly women considering ministry, is The Emotionally Healthy Woman. And I don't know if you've read any of the other, this is by Jerry Cesaro. I don't know if you've read any of the other Emotionally Healthy series. It's by her husband, Peter, but he does Emotionally Healthy Church, Emotionally Healthy Discipleship. It's an incredible series, but it's 8 things you have to quit to change your life. Okay, so what you will do is the Daniel Coren book, that's the required reading for everyone. But of these books, you will choose one of the 3. Okay, so you have 2 required texts for the class. The Daniel Coren book, He Called Her, and then you'll choose one of these. And it's laid out. So when you go to the module map, if you're on Canvas, each week I have something at the very top. It's called a module map. And if any of you have ever taken a course with my husband or with me, we try really hard to be organized and to make it easy to follow. So what we do with the module map is basically we take from the syllabus and we put it right there. So you know exactly what is expected that week, you know what is due. It's kind of all laid out there. So it will let you know kind of, the reading. So for this week, you have reading from Daniel Coren, and then you will choose one of these books. That gives you time to choose it, get it ordered, get it here, because your reading for that starts next week. So if you're on Canvas, you'll see the module map, and it kind of has everything laid out. And then each thing that's laid out will have a place for that on your module. So it's very easy. You can go to that and you can read what those things are. And I strongly encourage you. Some people just look at the syllabus and then try to go to the assignments or whatever. They never open the modules. And sometimes they miss assignments because they may not see things. And so I will tell you, most weeks you'll have a reading from the Coren book. You'll finish up these books in the first 4 weeks. So I would encourage you, when you get them, just start reading them. They're going to be easy reads. It might be challenging because it's challenging to us emotionally, right? But they're pretty simple reads. But then you may also have supplemental, like I may give you a chapter from a book, or I may give you a paper, published paper to read, or some things like that. So always be sure to go to the module map. And then when you go to the section that says reading, if there are supplemental readings that I'm assigning, you're going to find them right there in that section. So for the course, just like most any other course, we have required readings, but in your grades, at the end of the course, you will give a statement. Basically, this is the percentage of my books that I read. So, of those 2 required books, you'll give those, like the page numbers that you read. You will also do the covenant for viewing the lectures as well, because you can't. So in your discussion board post each week, you have to cite from the books, and you have to cite something from the lecture as well. So it's really important, especially since we're not meeting on campus, that we take the time for the lectures. So you have reading and lectures, you have discussion board posts, and discussion board posts, I'm sure you do that for most all of your distance learning courses. You'll have a couple of questions. And like I said, the lecture will the lecture will address those. So I give 2 questions. That way there's opportunity if there's one, that you feel more passionately about than the other. So you will post to one of them. Then after you make your initial post to one of them, those are due on Saturdays, okay? So that's the only thing. Everything else in the module is due Sunday night, but your discussion board post, your first post for that is due Saturday night. And then by Sunday night, you'll have a follow-up to appear. The reason I don't say it's all due Sunday night, because I was the girl who hated having to wait up until midnight every Sunday night because people didn't post till the very end, and I'm having to wait to respond to somebody. So everyone's initial post is due Saturday night, and then that way you can follow up sometime Sunday, just before the end of the night. So that's readings and lectures. That's discussion board post. And then what I hope will be a wonderful project for you is the interview project. You are to find one woman in ministry, preferably pulpit ministry. You can minister in a lot of various ways, but the preference for this assignment is that you find a woman who is licensed in the UPCI who has a pulpit ministry, and then you interview her. And there are some questions that are pretty clearly laid out. And so you will write a response paper based on that interview. You'll talk about the things that are the most, you'll address the questions that I ask, and then you'll have some introspection, with that as well. There's a rubric that you'll follow that will help you know exactly what I'm looking for. And then the following week, your classmates will respond. You'll get to read each other's interviews. I think that's great, because then you all get to learn from the wonderful women in ministry that you took the time to interview. And then they'll do like a response, just like a discussion board post in response to that. And so that will be due module 5. Okay, so I encourage you all to go ahead and sign up. As soon as you think you know who you want, go ahead and sign up for that person, and then try to get that lined up, because there can't be duplicates with people who are interviewing. So, and I will tell you, if you are like, I do not know a single woman around me who I could interview, I don't know a single woman who is licensed, then you let me know, and I have a list of women who would love to be interviewed by any of you wonderful ladies. So I got you. I'll help you there. And then so that's 1,000 words. So it's not a huge amount of writing with that either, but I think it's going to be a great project. Then what I'm trying to balance with this course is a balance between academic research, but then also practical ministry advice, and then self-reflection, right? So that's a lot to do in one course. Usually you're kind of got it going one way more so than the other. And so for the research project, we have 3 passages that we're going to analyze, and you get to choose one. And so obviously we have more than 3 ladies in the class. So several of you will be choosing the same passage, but there are only so many slots for each passage. So I've got a couple of passages that are challenging for women in ministry, and then I have one, the Galatians 3 passage, that is used to support women in ministry. And so so you can choose whichever passage you prefer. And there's a tab on Canvas that's called Collaborations. You just go right there, and you can see that's where you sign up for everything. It's just a Google sheet where you can sign up. But basically, you choose a passage, and then you will do exegesis with that passage. And I think all of you are juniors or seniors, so hopefully you know what exegesis is, and hopefully you've had to do it before. And if you have problems, let me know. But you're going to do word study. You're actually going to focus in on the passage. You'll focus in on keywords. If you do 2 Timothy 2:9-15, that passage is a little bit longer. So you're going to focus in on the keywords that are most crucial to the meaning. You don't have to exegete all 6 verses with that, because that would be pretty long to do. but the focus is to do word study, to look at the cultural background, to try to get a better understanding, really to understand what the passage meant to its original hearers, and then what it means to us today. So that will be that's going to be 30% of your grade. And so what I like to do to help out is at module 4, you guys will submit basically like a rough draft, and at that point you just need 750 words at a minimum. You'll submit that, and just so that I can see if you're on the right track. And that's your first stage. And then the final draft of the paper will be due module 7. Okay. So that way, that gives me time to give you a little bit of feedback as well. If the plane is crashing, I can let you know early on, and then you've got a week or two to right the ship. So I just use 2 different metaphors, but you got what I'm saying there. So so that's really the course in a nutshell. Each week I will have a lecture video for you available. You will do the reading, you'll do the lecture, you'll do the discussion board post addressing the questions that are there. And then there may be other assignments due, like your interview paper, or like the first draft of your research paper, things like that. Okay. Do y'all have any questions about the syllabus or about the expectations, anything along those lines?
I don't.
Okay. Kendall, are you good? Okay. Then
Yeah,
if y'all
I'm good.
have
No questions.
Okay, thank you. And if y'all have any questions, please don't hesitate to reach out to me related to that. So what I'd like to shift now is that was kind of more the overview of the course, right? Just so that we're kind of all on the same page. I know choosing optional required textbooks was kind of a different thing, so I for sure wanted to talk about that, so we were all clear. But what I'd like to do now is move into what would be our lecture for this week. First of all, I'm very excited to teach this course. A little about myself: I have been in ministry, goodness, now I'd say for over 30 years. I know you're thinking, you don't look that old. Thank you very much for that. I started in youth ministry when I was 16. And actually, and God called me to preach at that same age as well. But I got licensed, I would say maybe 12 years ago. I'm ordained with the UPCI. My husband and I, we're church planters. We started a church here in the Austin area. We were actually started a daughter work with Brother Bernard before he became general superintendent. So he's our pastor. And goodness, what an amazing ride that we have been on. So I'm very passionate about women in ministry, and I feel very indebted to the people who poured into me and opened doors for me. And so I want to do the same for other women. I think one thing that, and this will kind of get to your discussion board post and kind of what we're looking to accomplish in this first module. It's really considered an overview and to the question of, can women minister? And I think that most people, no one that I know of, even in the most conservative ranks, say that, oh no, women can't. It's just, what does that look like, and what are people comfortable saying yes to this point or not to that point? So I think that one thing that we will do throughout this course is to look to do our best to look objectively at what elements of our discussions are biblically based, what elements of our discussions are culturally based, okay? Because I think that if someone has a cultural objection, you can show them in the Bible all day long, right? But if it's this cultural thing that you're not going to get around, like I've heard things like, well, women can't, women shouldn't preach to men because they get emotional. Women shouldn't preach to men because, well, their voices are more boring. If I can say this, I've heard that women shouldn't be pastors or leaders because they have periods and they are moody. And, I mean, y'all, I've heard lots of things. If you ever heard that yet, just stick around. But none of those are biblical arguments, right? None of those are biblical arguments. So I think it's just good to establish the fact that we can talk about this from a biblical standpoint. We can talk about it from a cultural standpoint. So I think one thing that people will say in today's age is that, what is behind this push for women in ministry? I mean, is it just the UPCI's desire to be woke, and to follow along with all of these other movements? And so what I would say to that is that, yes, I think that our stance for women in ministry is a byproduct of modern social movements, but I don't think that that's where its origin was. I think if you look back at Azusa Street, at that revival, it's definitely pro-women. If you look at the first lady who received the baptism of the Holy Ghost, documented as Agnes Osmond, okay, well, that's not women in ministry, but still, there were women who preached. If you look at Lucy Farrow, if you look all throughout. So we can go back to our birthplace and we can see that at Azusa Street. We can look at the merger, okay, when the UPCI was formed. And at that time in 1946, if you look at the ministerial directory at that time, 22% of all licensed women were 22% of all licensed ministers were women. 22%. I mean, that's shockingly high when I first heard that number. I would say that there, if you understand the way society works and the way that cultural institutions work, and religious entities are the same in a lot of regards, but the pendulum swings, right? And so in the 60s, it was, of course, the largest pendulum swing we had seen. I was not born then, just to make that clear. But I've read and studied a lot about it. And so there was a pushback within the church against women in ministry. Why? Well, it was very reactionary to feminism. There was just this fear that feminism in the secular context, that it was going to creep into the church, right? And so even though women had historically been preaching, had been pastoring, had been doing all of this, there was this pushback. And so we went from, I'll tell you the number, so 22% in 1946, okay? In 2011, the number of licensed ministers in the UPCI was only 3%. It's only 3%. Now we're making great strides. Like, that's a pendulum swing, right? And that doesn't mean that women didn't minister. There were great women among us, like Vesta Mangan, like Thetis Tinney. There were great women among us who ministered, who preached. They just didn't get licensed because that was no longer socially accepted, right? So now, 60 years later, we see a cultural context in which more women graduate college than men. Women are breaking into elite leadership roles in the corporate world. You just see a lot of ceilings that have been shattered, so to speak. And so in society as a whole, there's little patience. And even more so, you're seeing that come into Christianity. There's little patience for denominations that hold women back from pursuing ministry. Now, the irony in all of this is that we were so far ahead of the curve. It's very similar to how we were ahead of the curve with race relations as well. We were so far ahead of the curve in these areas, but we just allowed society to sort of normalize us and bring us back to the mean of where all these other religious groups were. And it's so sad. But historically, we allowed that pendulum shift to move us back, and now we're trying to move the needle a little further in the direction of our original tendency. So in 1946, 22% of our licensed ministers were women. In 2011, 3% of our licensed ministers were women. In 2012, 6.8%. So we are making great strides in that regard. And I don't think it's necessary. Well, I will say it's not my goal that it's 50-50, but it is my goal that if a woman feels called to ministry, she shouldn't think that that's not to pulpit ministry. She shouldn't think that licensure is not the path for her because she doesn't see other role models following that. So I think that just speaks to, what are we talking about? Are we talking about this being, are we pursuing this only based on a woke agenda? No, I would say we were woke before woke was woke, if that's what people are going to say. We were pursuing the path that Jesus had for women. And so that kind of leads me to another question about what it means to be countercultural. And so, in some ways, of course, our culture values, I've had people walk into our church and they've said, oh, wow, it touched me in such a powerful way to see a woman preach. I've not seen that other ways. And that really ministered deeply to me. I mean, I will just tell you, it's not always the woman fuzzies. I've also, been preaching and seen a man get up and walk out before as well. So, I mean, there's that too. But I think that in many ways it is countercultural, especially in the church world. Right now there's such a cultural emphasis to deconstruct gender, period, right? So to me, how much more can we show how we image God and how we reflect him than by allowing men and women to minister and to show that we're all created in the image of God, but we're created to image him differently. And so I think that certainly if the promotion of women in ministry is countercultural in our day, it's definitely no more countercultural than it was in the time of Jesus. He lived in a time where women were greatly oppressed. They had very little rights, and frankly, no one championed their cause, but he did. And so I think that's important for all of us to sort of step back and say, we can make this about social movements, but much greater than that, this is a matter that is important to Jesus. Why? Because Jesus championed the cause of women. Jesus fought against the tide of culture to give rights to women. And so you see that with the woman who was caught in adultery. You see, he wouldn't allow her to be stoned without her male counterpart. Were there not two involved here? Where, well, then where are the accusers? Who's without sin here? So with the woman at the well, he sought after her soul. The woman with the issue of blood, she was an outcast from society. She was, in her context, an untouchable. And he allowed her to touch him. But not only allowed her to touch him, he touched her in her infirmity and brought healing to her. And then who did he appear to first after the resurrection? Of course, he appeared to the women and told them, go tell. He charged them to be evangelists. And so if you follow the ministry of Jesus, there's really no way to honestly argue that women are inferior in the plan of God or in ministry to men. Because in a culture that oppressed women, Jesus leveled the playing field. So that's kind of that's sort of our overview, and you'll get a little more of that in the Corin reading. He called her. If you all don't know Brother Corin, he is an apostolic author. He's a UGST graduate, and his work is compelling. I'm sure it will really draw you in. I encourage you, if you're able to order one of these 3 books as soon as possible and go ahead and get reading on those as quickly as you can. You won't be speaking to them in this week's post, but just to kind of get yourself ahead, I think you'll enjoy those books. And I encourage you also to quickly go and sign up for the scripture passage that you want to write about, as well as the person you would like to interview. All of your signups are due by Sunday. So the sooner you sign up for that, the more likely it is that you get to write about what you are most interested in. So that's all I have for y'all tonight. I appreciate you taking the time to be on the call with me, to be on the Zoom with me tonight. If you've got any questions, feel free to let me know, to reach out to me directly. I would just encourage you, when you are doing your discussion board posts, you always need to cite your reading, and you always need to cite something from the lecture each week. There are people, every class I teach, they write great things, but they get points deducted because they don't cite, because they're like, oh, this is, and it doesn't have to be, I don't care the format. You can just put in parentheses and page number, or just, just a Reddy lecture, blah, blah, blah. It doesn't really matter, because it is not academic writing, but we need to show that you're pulling everything together. So I want to make sure that everybody gets that. But I appreciate y'all coming tonight. If you've got individual questions, just reach out to me. And I'm very excited about this course. I hope it will be a great experience for all of you. Thank you. Have a great night. God bless you.